Good morning, class. Here I am at my house. You can see the beautiful flowers. There are flowers here as well. We keep things very nice. I'll stop doing that accent now. Here are your continued migration notes. So you should make sure you pause, get out your notes on migration that you finished up yesterday when we did our immigration skits. Hopefully, you guys can see my mouse on this screen. I'm not sure if you can. I'm also not sure. Oh, can I make this a little bit smaller? Did that make it smaller? I don't know. Ooh, how about that? Wow, 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 wow. Okay, I'm going to stop wasting your time here. Okay, we're going to start. We've been talking a lot about international migration, and there is a flip side to international migration, which is internal migration. And internal migration is any move within the same country. It has similar pulls and pushes, but there is a pretty strong difference. And that difference is that it's way, 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 way less disruptive. You can move from one part of a city to another part of a city, and your culture is not the same. You're not, like quote unquote, when I was in character, stealing resources from one country to another, or bringing a disease or ideas or culture that are different. You're keeping it all within the family. So it is much, 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 much more common. Why is it more common? Well, we know this. There's less cultural friction, right? You can speak the same language. You can have the same religion generally. It's way, way easier and frankly, way, way cheaper. Does my picture keep going away? Bam, here it is back again. Politics are the same. It's stuff you're used to. So that's internal migration. Within internal migration, you're going to need to know this word. You're going to need to be able to say it out loud in real life, and it is interregional migration. And that's a type of internal migration where people move from one region to another within the same region. Whoopsies, what just happened there? Ooh, I just went to a different screen. So it's moving in the same region. Moving within the same country or place, but within different regions. For us in the US, that would be about the same as moving from the West Coast to the East Coast. Same country, it's interregional, it's internal migration, but it is interregional because you're changing regions. You'll notice on this map, and this is a really important thing to know, I'll pop it up here so you can write it. It's usually from rural to urban centers. Still to this day, people are moving from less dense places to more dense places. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive because we live in California, but most people, if you take a look at this map here, hopefully you can see, this is in 1995. Most people are moving to the south. Look how big the arrows are. Lots of people are moving west as well, but most people, even from the West Coast, are moving south. Today, those numbers are a little less. We're kind of staying put, but we're still moving toward the south and to the west, right? So, that's what we're gonna look at America again. So you can see from that data. So you see that movement south, and you see that movement west. You need to know a term, and that term is the center population map. And a center population map is this guy up here. And basically, it's the mean average distance of most of the population of the United States in a dot. So if you see this dot here, this is, I think, 1885, where we started most of the population. This was the center of that population where everyone lived. And you can see over time, I wish I could zoom in, maybe you can see those dates, that it has come further and further left, and it is trending south as well. Why is that happening? Well, there's more business opportunities. As people have moved west, it's opening up more space. On the East Coast, where it's incredibly, established, there's not as many there's more resources, there's more fighting for resources because they've stopped growing in the same way that like Atlanta, Georgia is growing, right? People are being pushed out of the East out of the Midwest because factories are closing. So they're being pushed to areas where those factories are booming. Cool. So you should know, and you should write down somewhere what this map sort of looks like. Don't draw the whole thing, but you should know that people are moving west and people are moving south. You should probably also draw that population dot map, the center of population map, so that you know that the trend is south and west in the United States. With that, we're going to kind of kick into a really important historical case study. You guys have probably heard me play the song Trail of Tears in class. It's a song by Europe. It's not very good. But the Trail of Tears was what's called a forced interregional migration. That's what you need to write down from this. So a forced interregional migration, just like a forced international migration, is when people are pushed for any push or pull factor to a different area. In this case, maybe in one of the worst things in the history of Earth, white settlers intentionally and forcefully pushed native people from the south to the northwest, right? They made them walk the whole time. It's called the Trail of Tears because thousands and thousands of people died. That was in 1838. Never forget, kind of a terrible, terrible thing that happened in history, but also a great example of forced interregional migration. Sometimes we think a lot of like those boys in Sudan, and we're like, okay, well, that only happens there. Ooh, it happens here as well. And then another great American example is 80 years later, we had what's called the Great Migration, and that's an example of voluntary interregional migration. Make sure that you've written like tiny notes on at least both of these case studies, but you should definitely know voluntary interregional and involuntary interregional migration. So it's about 80 years later. This is after we've trying to clean up one of the other worst things that we've done in the history of the world, slavery. We're trying to clean this up. We free our slaves. And as you could guess, a lot of the slaves from the South wanted to move north. Now, you might think, hey, that feels a lot like forced migration because socially they probably weren't accepted just because the laws changed. And that's true. But in reality, as a geographer, what we see is that opportunities for jobs and, health, wealth, and well-being, they wanted to leave to a place where they could live a better life. So they voluntarily migrated north. And so this map here shows the original Black population and as they moved north after slavery ended. So there's sort of a push, but mostly it's the pull factor of successful economics. This was in the early 1900s, not that long ago. Couple more case studies you should know. This is something called extreme urban to rural migration. This is really important. And in China, well, we're going to look at China first. In China, there's what's called extreme urban to rural migration, but it's voluntary. And as we know, most of the opportunities are coastal in most areas, but specifically China. I mean, we know that Hong Kong is down here. We know that most of the job opportunities for China are on shipping and development East Coast. What does that mean for the population? It means that interregionally, tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons, make sure you write all of those down, of people are moving to the coast. It has become so bad, in fact, and here's where you need to write it down, that the country of China has put restrictions on interregional migration laws. This is crazy, right? If you think of our situation, that'd be like if you wanted to move to Oregon and the federal government said, no, you can't move to Oregon, right? So that's a great case study. You should write that down in your notes somewhere. And then here's kind of a counterexample, which was the Soviet Union had an inverse problem. Instead of people on the East Coast, people were all on the west side of Russia. And they didn't have any workers over here up in the Arctic Circle. I wonder why not. But there you go. They didn't have any workers on the East Coast and they needed workers. So the Russian government said, you know what? You're going. And they forcefully migrated people from the West Coast to the East Coast. They built trains. They built factories. This is back in the days of the Soviet Union. But it's a great example of forced interregional migration. Right? Remember, so you need to know forced and voluntary migration, forced and voluntary interregional migration. You need to know first forced and voluntary international migration. You should definitely be able to tell the difference between all those. Was that 6 things? Crazy. Really, it's only 2 things. And then those are pretty easy concepts. And you know how in geography we like to take something easy and really complicate it. You don't need to know this is called a hierarchical stepwise movement. I can't even say it, but you do need to draw this chart. It is called step migration. And often what happens in interregional migration is that people move in a pattern. We've seen movies where people move, like in the Muppet movie, they move from the farm town USA and then they move to the great big city, New York or whatever. That actually doesn't really happen that often. If we take a step back and look, if we take a small scale step, right? But mostly what happens, if we look here at the bottom, these are where people would start in isolated farms, agricultural villages, a family farm. And then what we see is that they move into smaller regional areas or larger regional areas, but not super large. So you might move from a village to a town, and then from a town to a small city, and then from a small city to a giant metropolis, right? So, we take a very easy concept of people moving from rural areas to urban areas, and we complicate it a little bit. People move in steps, and you should maybe copy down most of this map and know what those steps are. 3 steps, right? Pretty easy. Isolated farms, go to small towns, then go to regional centers in yellow, and then finally end up here at the national metropolis. Simple. You guys got it. You could write down the definition right under your graph. Okay, and then finally, we have a couple examples of what's called intra-regional migration. Intra means within, right? So intra-regional migration means moving from one place to another in the same region. Pretty easy. It's kind of like Inception. It's like you just go deeper into the dream. All of this stuff repeats itself. Just like there's international and interregional, now we have interregional and intra-regional, which is the movement of people within a region. This is super simple. This is the most common one. Remember in class we asked, hey, where has everyone lived before? And I said internationally, and maybe 4 people had raised their hands. But then I said, okay, has anybody moved within their whole lifetime here? And I was like, yeah, for sure we have. And most people are probably from California. Most people are probably from Sacramento. This would be like moving from Sacramento to Antelope or Roseville to Auburn or maybe even LA. As long as it's in the same region, and it depends on which kind of regions we're talking about, but it's in the same region, it's fine. And I spelled friction, Fricction on my notes. That's not good, guys. But why is it the most common? You guys know that. There is a low cultural cost. There's a low money cost to move. For all the same reasons that it's a higher cost to move internationally, it is much cheaper socially, environmentally, economically, and maybe politically by region. I don't know about politically. Probably politically, it's cheaper. And there are many types of intra-regional migration. The first is urbanization, which is the trend from people moving from rural moves from rural to urban areas. Somebody say it for me. From rural to urban areas. All right, I'm your teacher. But basically, people are moving from towns and poorer places to richer, denser populations. That's called urbanization. There is also a trend that we see where people move within urban areas. For example, I moved from West Sacramento to Oak Park, and then I moved from Oak Park to Tahoe Park. I didn't do that last one, but that would be within urban areas, be intra-regional travel. If I'm in Chicago, I might move from one suburb to another. If I'm New York, I might move from the Bronx to Brooklyn, right? It's all the same place, but I'm moving within the urban areas. The third is called suburbanization. Here's a great example, Brisbane, Australia. So people all went to the cities and they were like, I want my own house. No, that's not right. Whoa, bro. Okay, I can't do Australian. I'm not great at accents, but there you go. They all moved from cities now out to kind of the houses. Suburbanization is similar to what Antelope is a result of from Sacramento City. So lots of people moved from the dense city and started spreading eastward, starting in Rancho Cordova, then Roseville, then Granite Bay, then, right? So it's a suburbanization. What's really important to know about suburbanization, and write this down, is that all of these moves, especially suburbanization and urbanization, come with permanent changes to the geography. So just because a bunch of people want to move out to the suburbs, well, they have to build suburbs. So if you look at Brisbane, Australia, you see where the city was and most people used to live. Now look how the landscape has changed as a result, right? It becomes with permanent results. That's from cities to suburbs, by the way, suburbanization. And then finally, there's a new one called counter-urbanization. This has kind of come with the advent of the internet. And this doesn't happen that often because it requires a lot of money. Think hipsters, think tech people who lived in the city and just want to get out of the city and move to more to move to rural areas. It's a new movement. It's really popular with people with money. So that's not me. I live in the city. I lied. And finally, there's something called re-urbanization, which is when everyone's left the city and then all of a sudden cities are cool again. Miami, Florida is a great example that you should write down of this. Everyone left Miami. It was a crummy, dingy city. And then people came back and they fixed it. They made it all nice again. And that's a result of re-urbanization. So I think back to inner cities. I think that's it. And so tomorrow there is a test on this. Also, next week is your unit test. So what are we going to do to prepare for that unit test? Are you going to study? In what ways are you going to study? Everybody said they should study earlier instead of at the last minute. This is the time to start. Go ahead and get cracking on your studying. I would start, tonight. I will see you guys tomorrow. Sorry I wasn't in class today. Have a good night.